We live in a world that teaches us to control everything: our schedule, our future, our relationships, our image, even our thoughts. We're taught that success is about domination, that peace is about planning, that safety comes from certainty. But what if everything we've been taught is backwards? What if the very act of trying to control life is what's creating our stress? What if peace doesn't come from more control but from trust? This sounds simple, even naive, in a society addicted to metrics and mastery. But let's go deeper. Let's look at this not as a motivational idea, but as a profound philosophical truth. Because when we really examine where stress comes from, we realize it's not from events. It's from resistance to events. It's from the mind's refusal to let life be what it is. And that resistance, that mental war against the present moment, is what fractures us, overwhelms us, and burns us out. So if you want less stress, not just temporarily, but existentially, then the answer isn't more control. The answer is learning how to trust life again, not blindly, not passively, but deeply.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let's pause and look at one of the most overlooked truths of the human condition. You are not in control of life, and you never were. You didn't choose the day you were born. You didn't design your DNA. You didn't pick your childhood environment. You didn't create gravity, the weather, or the laws of time. And yet, for most of your waking life, your mind pretends it's in charge. It builds plans. It fantasizes about outcomes. It creates mental scripts for how things should go. And then, when reality doesn't follow the script, the mind panics. It fights. It tightens. It says, "This isn't supposed to happen." But what if that very tension is the root of your suffering? What if peace isn't about fixing reality, but aligning with it? What if stress is just the friction between your expectations and what life is actually doing? And what if that friction can dissolve not by changing life, but by changing the way you relate to it? This is where trust comes in. Not the kind of trust that says everything will be easy, but the kind of trust that says, whatever is happening, I can meet it. I can work with it. I don't need to collapse into fear or grasp for control. I can flow. That's not weakness. That's power. Because the deepest strength doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from being centered in the unknown. It comes from knowing that life is not a machine to be controlled, but a river to be navigated. And rivers are wild. They twist. They rise. They flood. But they also carry you if you know how to stop clinging to the shore. Let's go even deeper. What does it actually mean to trust life? It doesn't mean you stop making choices. It doesn't mean you become passive. It means something far more intelligent. It means you act without attachment. You plan, but you're not owned by your plans. You love, but you don't try to possess. You work, but you don't tie your identity to the outcome. You recognize that life is not a linear path from goal to goal. It's a vast, unpredictable unfolding. And your job is not to control it, but to dance with it, to move with presence, with openness, with curiosity. And that shift from control to communion is where stress starts to dissolve, because stress is the child of control. But peace is the child of trust. Now, let me ask you a question you may have never considered. What if the very things you're trying to control are the ones that would most transform you if only you'd let them? What if the relationship that's falling apart is actually the doorway to your healing? But what if the job you lost wasn't a punishment but a redirection? What if the uncertainty that terrifies you is actually the space where your next evolution is waiting? You'll never know if you keep resisting. You'll never know if you keep trying to force life to match your expectations. But if you trust, if you surrender not as defeat, but as alignment, then life begins to reveal its deeper intelligence. Not always immediately, and not always in the way you want, but always in the way you need. This is where philosophy meets practice. Because trusting life isn't just an idea. It's a discipline. It's something you do moment by moment, breath by breath. When plans fall apart, you trust. When people misunderstand you, you trust. When your mind spins stories of doom and failure, you breathe deeper and you trust. Not because you're naive, but because you've realized that stress does nothing but steal your presence, and presence is where power lives. When you trust, you stop leaking energy into what you can't control. You start focusing on what you can, your attitude, your actions, your awareness. And from that place, you become unstoppable. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop being so easily thrown off by its chaos. Let's look at nature. Nature doesn't stress. The tree doesn't panic when the storm comes. The ocean doesn't resist the tide. The bird doesn't plan its entire migration before taking flight. Nature moves with life. It adapts. It trusts the seasons. It trusts the rhythms. And in that trust, there is a profound intelligence, a harmony deeper than logic. Why do we think we're separate from that? Why do we think we have to control everything ourselves? We are nature. We are not machines. And the more we try to live like machines, predictable, productive, perfect, the more we suffer. But when we come back to rhythm, when we come back to trust, we begin to heal. We begin to remember, life is not here to be controlled. It's here to be lived. So let me ask you this, what would your life feel like if you trusted it completely? If you stopped fighting the moment and started meeting it? If you stopped resisting uncertainty and started dancing with it? Who would you be without the stress, the grasping, the endless mental war? And what if that version of you isn't far away, but right beneath the surface, waiting for you to let go just enough to feel it? This isn't spiritual escapism. This is psychological realism. Because the mind that's always controlling is a mind that's always afraid. But the mind that trusts, that mind is free. And freedom isn't found in perfection. It's found in participation, in showing up fully for this moment, whatever it holds, in breathing into the unknown instead of shrinking from it, in acting with intention, but releasing the outcome. That's trust. That's power. And that's where stress becomes unnecessary, not because life gets easier, but because you become wiser. Let's start with the most counterintuitive truth you'll ever hear. The moment you stop trying to control life is the moment you begin to influence it most powerfully. That's not a contradiction, it's a paradox. And paradoxes are where the deepest truths hide. What we call control is often just fear wearing a mask. We micromanage, overthink, plan every detail, not because we're in charge, but because we're terrified of what might happen if we're not. But here's the problem: when you live in fear, the energy you project into the world is resistance. And resistance creates friction. It blocks flow. It creates strain. You may get results, but they're costly. You may reach goals, but you're burned out. You're not living, you're surviving. And here's the paradox. When you let go of that desperate need to manage every outcome, you don't become passive. You become precise. Your energy becomes undivided. Your decisions become cleaner. And life starts meeting you with less pushback, because you're finally moving with it, not against it. But let's go deeper, because this isn't just about emotions. It's about existential power. You see, surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means giving in to reality. It means accepting what is, so you can move from a place of clarity, not conflict. Think about it. How often do we waste energy resisting what has already happened? We argue with the past. We replay conversations. We try to undo what is, instead of responding to it. That's where stress breeds, in the refusal to accept reality as it is. But when you surrender, when you say, "This is what's happening. I don't have to like it, but I can face it," something wild happens. Your power comes back online. Because you're no longer split between reality and your fantasy of how things should be. You're here, awake, available, and from that place you can act not from desperation, but from truth. Now, here's where this flips everything upside down. Most of us think we need control to feel safe. But what if the opposite is true? What if the more you try to control, the less safe you feel, because you're constantly scanning for threats, constantly bracing for what might go wrong, constantly tightening your grip? That's not security. That's a prison. And the bars are built from fear. But when you let go, when you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you create space. Space for presence. Space for creativity. Space for strength. Because real strength doesn't come from control. It comes from coherence. From being aligned with the truth of the moment instead of fighting it. That's the paradox. Surrender doesn't weaken you. It focuses you. It turns your attention toward what matters, but it turns your energy into a laser beam. And in that focus, you become more powerful than you ever were when you were trying to manage everything. Let's look at the Stoics, some of the most practical philosophers in history. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they all said the same thing in different ways. You cannot control what happens, but you can always control your response. That's not philosophy, that's freedom. Because when you stop trying to control the world out there, you gain mastery over the world in here. Your emotions, your thoughts, your choices. And that mastery is where your peace lives. You can't control the economy, but you can control how you adapt. You can't control how people treat you, but you can control what you tolerate. You can't control the weather, but you can decide how to walk through the storm. That's surrender, not giving in, but rising above. Rising above the illusion that your peace depends on the world behaving the way you want. Now, here's the question that breaks illusions. What are you holding on to that's actually holding you back? What expectations, what narratives, what identities are you white-knuckling because you're afraid of who you'd be without them? What would happen really if you let go? Not gave up, but let go. Would you fall apart, or would you finally fall into yourself? Into the version of you that trusts life not because it's easy, but because you are ready to meet life as it is, not as you demand it to be. This is where the transformation happens. When you stop gripping the wheel so tightly, you realize life has been driving all along. And that's not fatalism. That's alignment. It means you stop trying to force the river and start learning how to flow with it, how to read the currents, how to steer when you can, how to let go when you must. And in that dance, you discover something astonishing. Life is not your enemy. It's your mirror. It reflects your state of being. When you're tense, life feels hostile. When you're open, life feels generous. Not because life changed, but because you did. Let's get practical for a second. Surrender is not passive. It's incredibly active. It means choosing clarity over chaos. But it means asking, in every situation, what's in my control and what's not. And then putting your full energy into what is your words, your focus, your actions, and releasing what's not with grace. It means catching yourself when you're slipping into mental resistance and asking, can I let this be what it is, even if I don't prefer it? And it means remembering, again and again, that peace doesn't come from the world being perfect. It comes from you being present. Let me ask you something that might change your life. What would happen if you stopped trying to fix everything and just allowed yourself to feel it? What would happen if you stopped trying to manipulate life into submission and started entering into a relationship with it, one based on trust, not fear? That's where the paradox becomes clear. The more you let go, the more space you create. And in that space, life can actually reach you. Opportunities come. Clarity comes. Healing comes. Not because you forced them, but because you got out of the way. Remember this, trust is not about believing everything will work out the way you want, but it's about believing that you will be okay, no matter how it works out. That's the true root of stress, believing that you won't survive the unknown. That if something doesn't go your way, you'll collapse. But that's a lie. You've survived every uncertain moment of your life so far. You've adapted, you've learned, you've grown. And every time you've let go, even just a little, life has met you with something unexpected. Maybe not what you wanted, but often exactly what you needed. So surrender, not as weakness, but as wisdom. Let go not of effort, but of attachment. Trust not in blind faith, but in your own capacity to meet life fully. And when you do, stress stops being the default. It becomes a signal, a teacher, a call back to trust. Because life isn't asking you to control it. It's asking you to dance with it. There's a frequency, a state of being that most people never access because they're too busy trying to outthink life. They live in a mental storm of what-ifs and shoulds, trying to predict, prepare, protect. But here's the thing, you can't outthink the infinite. You can't mentally dominate a universe that's been evolving for billions of years. You can only align with it. That's the trust frequency. It's not a mood. It's not a mindset. It's an energetic posture, a way of relating to life that says, I don't know where this is going, but I know who I am while I walk through it. And when you live from that place, something incredible happens. Chaos doesn't disappear, but it stops disrupting you. The noise of the world doesn't vanish, but it stops owning your nervous system. Everything is still happening, but something inside you isn't shaking. That's not because you've mastered the external. It's because you've rooted yourself in the internal. You've tuned into the trust frequency. Let's break this down. We think clarity comes from answers, but real clarity comes from alignment. Alignment is when your thoughts, emotions, and actions are all flowing in the same direction toward presence, toward truth, toward what is real. But you can't get aligned if you don't trust, because trust is the bridge between chaos and clarity. Without it, you're always doubting, second-guessing, overanalyzing. And here's the kicker: the more you analyze, the less you experience. You become a spectator in your own life. You're there, but not really in it. You're observing, judging, calculating, but not living. And that's the silent tragedy of modern life. We've become so scared of being wrong, of failing, of feeling uncertain, that we've forgotten what it means to simply be here, or to live with a kind of sacred openness. But that's what the trust frequency gives you. It doesn't promise safety, but it gives you sovereignty. Now, you might be wondering, how do I access this frequency? How do I live in trust when everything around me feels unstable? The first step is radical honesty. Trust isn't about pretending. It's about telling the truth, especially to yourself. You have to get honest about what you're afraid of. You have to get honest about how much of your life is driven by fear, by control, by trying to avoid pain. And then you breathe into that fear, not to fix it, but to feel it. Because trust isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to move through it. To say, yes, I'm afraid, but I'm here, I'm present, I'm not abandoning myself. That's what changes you. That's what shifts your vibration. And vibration is not some mystical concept, it's just another word for state of being. And your state of being is what shapes your reality. Let's take this further. When you live in the trust frequency, something subtle but profound begins to happen. You stop making decisions from panic. You stop chasing validation. You stop grasping. Instead, you begin listening. You listen to your body. You listen to your intuition. You listen to life not as noise, but as guidance. You start to notice synchronicities. You start to feel when something is aligned, even if it doesn't make logical sense. And this is where logic meets mystery, where reason meets rhythm. Because the trust frequency is not irrational, it's transrational. It includes logic, but it's not limited by it. It's the intelligence of the whole being. And when you live from that, you don't need everything to make sense. You just need it to feel true. This is where stress dissolves, not because the world changes, but because your relationship to life changes. You stop demanding certainty, and you start dancing with the unknown. And in that dance, life begins to respond to you differently. You become a tuning fork for clarity. People feel it. They trust you more. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're present with the questions. You're not flinching. You're not performing. You're just being. And being is what the world needs more than ever. Not more productivity. Not more perfection. But more presence. More people who are rooted in trust, grounded in awareness, and unshaken by the chaos around them because they've found peace within. Let me ask you something that might change everything. What if clarity isn't something you find, but something you become? What if life is always speaking to you, but you can't hear it because you're too busy trying to control it? What would happen truly if you stopped trying to figure it all out and started learning how to feel your way through? This isn't about abandoning reason. It's about integrating it into a larger intelligence, the kind that flowers in spaciousness, in silence, in trust. The kind that doesn't need quick fixes or constant answers because it's rooted in the knowing that life itself is intelligent, that you're not separate from it, that you are it. And here's the final truth. Trust is a choice. Not once, but every moment. Every time your mind says this is too much, you get to choose. Every time your plans fall apart, you get to choose. Every time fear knocks on your door, you get to choose. Will you tighten or will you breathe? Will you collapse or will you stay open? Will you fight the current or will you flow with it? That choice is your power. It's your freedom. And the more you choose trust, the more life opens up in ways your mind could never have planned. So if you want less stress, don't just change your schedule. Don't just organize your life. Change your relationship to life itself. But start trusting it. Start listening. Start showing up not as someone who needs to control everything, but as someone who's ready to meet everything fully, intimately, courageously. That shift will change not just your emotions, but your whole existence.